has just magically started it. Okay, good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Hi.
Welcome to the third panel in our series about demystifying the academic job application process. And this one is specifically on preparing a teaching demonstration. I don't actually think an hour is going to be enough time to do what we need to do, but we're going to try to give you some really important basics, some really good foundation here for what this process looks like. This is the third in our series. We did one on preparing materials. We did one on preparing the job talk in particular for an academic job talk. And this is a component that I think all of us at the grad college feel is really central and increasingly is becoming a really important part of the dossier, but is not getting enough attention as we see it. And so I am delighted. Hi, welcome, come on in. So I will introduce our panelists, and then we're basically just going to do a Q&A portion. I will moderate the discussion, and we'll go from there. Alyssa G will be taking care of the chat to see what questions come in, and I will be moderating in the room and kind of keep us on point. So I'd first like to introduce myself. My name is Alyssa Crittenden. I'm the Vice Provost for Graduate Education and the Dean of the Graduate College here at UNLV. I am your host for this afternoon, for this hour. To my left is Dr. Lisa Johnson, an assistant professor, faculty in residence, and the undergraduate coordinator in the Department of Anthropology. My home department, but I'm totally unbiased. Totally unbiased. To her left, we have Dr. Sophie, associate professor in residence in the Department of Teaching and Learning in the College of Education. And last but absolutely not least, we have Dr. Anthony Ferrar, assistant professor in residence in engineering. So we have assembled for you three outstanding educators who are going to hopefully give us some really good pointers on how to prepare this part of your materials, essentially this component going on the job market. So the first question that I will have each of you answer, and I'm going rogue. I'm going off of our list.
Oh, you are? Okay,
Yeah.
thanks for preparing
Yeah,
us.
you're welcome. So the very first question that is, what brought you into teaching in your discipline? Because I think that that's a really important decision that we make at some point. So you don't have to have anything super pithy, but just something that pulled you in or something that keeps you in.
Are you throwing this out at the table?
At the table, not you, Lisa, specifically
Okay.
at the table.
All right.
I mean, I can certainly start. As a teacher educator, I always saw myself having larger impact by teaching soon-to-be teachers, pre-service teachers, and being local within the Las Vegas Valley, knowing how important it was to prepare teacher educators. I was drawn to that teaching piece. And I think one of the things that I love about it, being an in-residence or sometimes called clinical, depending on where you're applying at, is that for us here at UNLV, it's not only teaching, but it's also service. So being able to teach and then collaborate with community partners is big for me. And so I saw that as paired and parsed nicely. On top of that, just the mentorship that goes into, particularly in my position, mentoring other part-time instructors and other faculty on how to be an effective teacher at the college level. Because I think there's a misunderstanding that at the college level, we don't as much put that passion into our teaching, whereas faculty in residence or clinical in residence, choosing that path, that is your dedication, is to that teaching and that student process. So, yeah.
Okay, I'll go next. So my attraction to teaching has to do with my background. I think it's because I saw college as intimidating. I wasn't familiar with it, and I know what kind of impact a good or a bad, like not a good, but how do you say it? I know what it's like to have one professor, one teacher that really stands out, that actually makes you feel like you belong there. makes it accessible to you. I mean, I battled with, you know, this feeling I didn't belong there. Nobody in my family ever went to college. I was an older student. I already had babies, so I was really out of place. But when you have one good professor, one good teacher that actually like encourages you and says, no, you belong here, that is such a boost of confidence. So I think people like that are needed in the classroom. And so I felt this sense of like, I wanted to bring in more people to spread that message, like, no, we all belong here. There's no like traditional student, that doesn't really exist. I've heard this all the time, non-traditional, but when you get to know people individually, you realize everybody's there for different reasons and different passions. And so, so mine was really personal. My reason why I'm always attracted to teaching and mentoring is because I wanted everybody to know this secret, you know, that you do belong here and there is no like traditional student. So I hope that I can continue to do that.
Awesome.
So my senior year of college, I started dating a first-year student, and I decided to get my master's so I wouldn't have to move away from it.
Well, there you have
I've
it.
never thought of myself up until then as an academic or anything like that. I was like, oh, but if we get a master's degree, she and I graduate at the same time. It worked out. We're married. We've got 3 kids now. But we've got quite some time.
So it's a good choice.
Yeah.
But,
Personally and professionally.
yeah, right. It did. And my first semester in grad school, you know, I'm just thinking, get a master's, go out, work on jet engines. That was my deal. And we had to go to a NASA conference that was only for sponsored projects, and it was essentially remind us again why we should keep sending you money. And so I go to this thing with my advisor, and the whole weekend that we're there, all of these important people are walking up and asking him for advice, and I was just astonished, right? So now I'm driving back across Virginia, 7-hour car ride. I just looked at him and I said, I don't understand why it is. I mean, like, the deputy director of NASA's like presidential appointee level kind of stuff was just asking you for advice about jet engines. Why are you living in Blacksburg, Virginia, teaching the 8 of us about jet engines when you could be out there doing all this? And he said, I'll show you when I get back to my office. And we get to his office, and he pulls this desk drawer open. He's got a yellow pad, and it's like curled up at the edges and brittle. And only the first page and part of the second is filled with 2 columns of names. There's 150 some names on here. Every one of them is somebody who went through my lab during my 4-year career. They're all out doing that. I'm selfish. I couldn't pick a project to solve, and so I multiplied myself.
Yeah.
And something about that just hit me. I said, thanks very much, you'll have to excuse me. And I walked out of his office and started filling out paperwork for PhD school. And then the thing that drove it home, we had 1 semester gap in plumbing, and I got the opportunity to be a TA and instead of doing research. And I just sucked at it. I was the worst. I was so bad. I was disorganized. I was sweating in front of the classroom, like nobody knew what the heck was going on. And so I went over to the Teaching and Learning Center and signed up for one of the contemporary pedagogy course, Shelley Ballard. And she starts talking about what teaching is really about. And that's when I knew. I was just like, oh, I get it. And it became my favorite thing. That's all I do. And it's funny because by the time I graduated, I viewed, you know, I viewed the research that I was doing as the punishment for the opportunity to be in a classroom. And so a little bit later on, when I discovered that there was a career track for me to emphasize the part I loved the most, I went running there. And now I'm on this mission to not only multiply myself in my classrooms, but start working with grad students and faculty who are on the tenure line, because I don't think these have to be mutually exclusive.
No.
I don't think you have to be a great researcher or a great educator, but you can't do both. And my goodness, what if, I mean, you're in the business of exponentiating yourself, teaching the teachers, my goodness, we want to see lasting change. I think this is how it happens.
Well, I want to piggyback on that because you brought up a really important point. I think a lot of our graduate students think, well, I have to be tenure track. This is where I have to land. That's not the case at all. Like, you are just as valuable as teaching faculty as you are research faculty. And like both of my colleagues said here, that passion and that drive if it's there, go for it, because it doesn't mean that you can't make impact. It's just a different avenue. And like all of us said, for us, it's even more impactful in many ways than the ways that we do it.
Love that.
Thank you so much. Wow, okay, that put in even better answers than I could have imagined. But I think that it touches on something really important, which is why I decided that we were really when we came together at the Grad Academy thinking about programming for this year, one of the things that I hear repeatedly is that students feel ill-prepared for alternate academic pathways and for these postgraduate pathways with their doctoral degrees in particular, that set them up for success on the job market in ways that are outside of the tenure track. And increasingly, that's where the jobs are.
Yeah.
And that's where a lot of nourishing professional work is done for folks. And we felt like there wasn't enough opportunity to have these conversations and to help set up students who are entering the job market for success in these spaces, because there are many more jobs that are going to be in the vein where you are going to be doing something like a teaching demonstration right now in the job market. And so to not prepare you for success, to not talk about the folks who are teaching the bodies, the vast majority of bodies in higher ed, just seems like we're turning a blind eye to an amazingly valuable resource that we should be tapping into for the next generation. So that was exactly the motivation for this panel. So my first question is essentially sort of, it's not really it's a question, I guess. I will pose it as a question. For those who are less familiar with what a teaching demonstration is, because we have some students who are in their first and second years who are trying to figure out which trajectory they want to go on. They know that many of them are doctoral students and they want to do research, they're interested in research, again, not mutually exclusive, but can be. It's really, there's a lot of flexibility, there's a lot of latitude here in these pathways, but they might be considering a teaching track as well. They don't really know what this process looks like. So there's a lot of information out there on the job talk and how to prepare your dossier, but what exactly is a teaching demonstration? So just very briefly, and at what type of institution, for what type of interview, might one be asked to prepare one? So just very basic, but just for the students who might be less familiar.
I've interviewed at 3 different institutions that have gone to work for now, and a dozen others in the hunt. Everything from a community college to a private 4-year undergrad only school to R1 state schools. And I've had to do a teaching demonstration in all of them. And most of those, by the way, were for tenure track jobs. And I turned down some of those offers to come here actually. It's a really joyful thing to do. It was so cool. Yeah, what a privilege, right? But all of them had one. And so basically on the big day of your site visit, they run you through quite a grinder, to be honest. It's a big day, like get a good rest and drink your coffee, right? I met on an average interview, you end up meeting one-on-one for an hour with like 4 or 5 different senior level faculty members, plus the department chair, plus the dean. They run you through everything there. And then they usually invite you to do a guest seminar, which is code for your research talk. And so you'll be presenting on what your research is and potentially where you would go next as you move on and become an independent researcher out from under your advisor. And then in addition to that, I've always heard it called a chalk talk instead of a teaching demonstration, but same idea. It's essentially tell us about how you teach and what that's like. And usually the format of that is, pretend like you're giving a guest lecture or a lecture in the middle of one of the courses you're teaching, I should say, rather than a guest lecture. Like pretend like you were there last week. And now we're just continuing on with the semester. What's it look like?
Right. And we talked a bit about chalk talks last time also. By design, every time we convene a panel, we do our very best to pull folks from a variety of disciplines, because all of you are from a variety of disciplines, and so it makes sense to do our best to accommodate that. But last week, I think it was last week, I have no concept of time. I think it was last week. We talked about a chalk talk, also in terms of sometimes the chalk talk in STEM is essentially mapping out your research trajectory over the next 5 or 10 years as well. So it's used in both ways. But it is, so you'll hear Talk again today in regard to this as well, but it's also teaching, because often you do a lot of chalkboard teaching and whiteboard teaching in STEM right now. It's hard to believe for those who are in humanities, but it still is happening on the regular. So I'm sure you do that as well. So just to give you sort of to thread that Talk from last week to this week. So thank you, that was very, very helpful. Do either one of you want to jump in on describing what it looks like?
I'll talk a little bit about, because I'm in the social sciences, and there is this tendency, and I came from UC Berkeley, which is really emphasis on research. So there's this tendency to want to do the research talk. And I almost went down that route, which would not have worked for this kind of job, because you're not there to impress the faculty with your research. They know about it, they know your CV, and you're there to demonstrate that you could then translate that to a lower level classroom. So it should appear very intentional, like a lesson plan. So it's almost like when you're writing your teaching philosophy and I don't know if you've ever been told, like, when I read your teaching philosophy, I should get a sense of what it's like in your classroom. You know, what kind of activities do you promote? What are your objectives? What kind of learning are you really trying to emphasize here? So in a teaching demonstration, you're trying to demonstrate all the different strategies you have for engaged learning and for, you know, giving a very clear learning objectives and rationale behind, you know, your topic. And so hopefully as a grad student, I did this, and I hope that you all are too, taking advantage of these teaching certificates and workshops that are available, because I did an entire program to get certified, to get the certificate program. And I borrowed from that, because they teach you all of these in-class little activities you can do and discussions. And so I borrowed a couple of those and brought them into my teaching demonstrations so that I could show different activities that I could integrate. So that's really what you're doing. Clearly you have to have a mastery of the topic, but you have to like be really demonstrating all your skills in teaching that topic. So I think the danger is thinking that you have to impress the faculty with your research, but that's not exactly why you're here. And so, yeah, you give a research talk instead, and it might not go well. Yeah.
Well, and I think too, I think this might be jumping ahead a little bit, but the organization is tremendously important when you're doing a teaching talk.
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah, that's great.
Because based on what my colleague said, you come in, and I'm gonna piggyback on what Lisa said, is you think it's research. It can be. You can say, this is what grounds my teaching, and this is how I got to this particular way of teaching. That's fine, that's great. But then being intentional about what are the skills that you want to target, like you said, the objectives, how are you going to teach that? In the field of education, in elementary education, for example, when I did job talks, I literally took my colleagues through a demonstration of what word study is to help them learn, so that they could see, like, this is the way that I do things. I walk around the classroom, I talk to my students, I evaluate their learning process, even in a job talk in front of colleagues. And so starting with what is your
a little awkward, by
it
the
is
way.
weird.
It's a
It's
little
really weird, but
to
it's
do that.
important,
Yeah.
especially coming from a search committee looking at a teaching demonstration. So starting with, where does your research define your teaching, or how does your theoretical beliefs define your teaching? And then going into actually addressing objectives, teaching that lesson, and then don't forget to evaluate what they learned and talk to them, talk to your people that are in your demonstration, get a sense of what they learned. Did you actually make impact in that particular way of teaching? And I know that's coming from a teacher education perspective, but having been on about 6 search committees now with clinical positions and residence positions, we want that cohesive line, like, here's who I am, here's why I do it, here's what I'm gonna teach, and here's how I'll assess it, at least from our perspective.
That's really helpful. That's very helpful. I want to take a moment and pause to see if we have any questions in the chat.
I do have one question.
Okay.
Bit specific, but Jasmine asks, while enrolled in a MPA program, how can I start looking for student teaching opportunities? Master of Public Affairs, please.
So I can answer globally, kind of from the grad college perspective. In graduate school, most of those teaching opportunities start within your home unit in your home department. Not always, I should say not always, we'll get to that in a moment, but many of them, the majority of them start in your home unit. And so if you are interested in gaining teaching experience, the first thing to do is talk to your advisor, talk to the chair of your thesis committee, and determine what opportunities are available in your program. That would be my first piece of advice. There are other opportunities available around campus. There are often many units that are seeking graduate assistantships, people to fill their graduate assistantship lines, and it's often right before the semester is starting. We are moving increasingly, we are hoping, here's another plea. I made a plea yesterday for all the graduate coordinators to continue doing this, but if you have those open lines and you don't have a student and you are desperate for teaching support, to post those positions on something called Handshake, so that you can go to a central repository and find out what is available. We've had several teaching GA shifts for this semester appointed that way. And last but not least, and then I will see if other folks want to contribute, we have a teaching certificate program, like Dr. Johnson mentioned, that's through the Grad Academy. And so we have, it's very popular, it is very highly regarded, and a lot of that core content is coming from my colleagues in the College of Education, and so it is really on point. It's very, very good, and we've had nothing but positive feedback from that, so that's perhaps not necessarily actively in the classroom in the same way that you're asking about, but it will provide some really good opportunities. Other thing, we actually have a lot of our students who are current graduate students here who teach classes at CSN. That is also something that happens regularly and routinely, one-off courses. So once you have that experience, you then may be eligible to apply to get your feet wet that way. So.
I could piggyback for just, I'm a very grassrootsy kind of guy, and so any opportunity to give a guest seminar or a guest lecture is a way to start honing your craft and get practice at that.
Perfect.
And so, in public affairs, I can imagine folks like the Boys and Girls Club or community centers and things like that would just love to hear from you. And if you could figure out a guest seminar to get there, or for student orgs on campus that are having their, 3 or 4 times a semester meetings, I get invited to those things occasionally, but the first one I asked for, right? I got connected with an undergrad student and said, hey, if you're in this organization and they ever need a guest speaker, let me know. And that turned into an invitation. Which, by the way, they get to toss on your CV as an invited talk.
That's right.
And these things are important, right? Because they're valued in different ways. And so having been invited to a one-off presentation is actually a helpful asset as well.
Right, okay, so I just want to mention the one thing I failed to do in my interview is I was explicitly asked, have you ever done service as a grad student? And I said, no. And then I talked to my mentor later about how the interview went. She goes, what do you mean no? You've been doing outreach, you've visited grade schools and given demonstrations of archaeology, you work for the archaeological research facility, you're helping your department, you're helping professors. And so she just went on and listened. She said, you're the worst at talking about yourself, which is true, but I didn't realize I counted as service. So those little volunteers to give those guest talks and visiting schools and those little things, all of that, you do it and you don't think about it, but it all matters and it's all building that. So anyway, so there's a few mistakes I made when I interviewed and only now knowing.
I think too, if there's an opportunity to be a teacher's assistant or a teaching internship within your program. I know in the College of Education, and I have some students in the room, we have specific teaching internships that you can take as a graduate level student. And it's really important to do that. Like oftentimes, even if you do choose a research tenure track, they're gonna wanna see that you've taught a class, even if it's as a teaching assistant. So take those opportunities when you can. If you should have an academic advisor or a mentor in your PhD program, be bold, say, hey, what are the teaching opportunities for me? And like you said, also like if there's a way to piggyback onto something that they're doing a demonstration on, can I come with you? You as a graduate student have to be brave to talk and ask, and that's hard to do, right? Because I mean, you know, we're working your way through your program, but there's always opportunities, and 9 times out of 10, faculty aren't gonna say no. If we can't do it for you right then, we're gonna figure out how to help you get that opportunity. Who can I pair you with that could help you support what your goals are as a teacher?
And attend to the job talks in your department.
Absolutely.
Watch others.
Watch others do it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And this is really specific, but I was talking to one of your colleagues who's here in person before we got started, and they were saying that they supported UNLV's Math Summer Bridge program.
Awesome.
And I think that's one of these things that is just constantly seeking more volunteers and is understaffed. And I don't really know that it matters what discipline you're from. There's probably a way to show up and support. And what I've noticed is momentum breeds momentum.
Yes.
Right? The first time you do something, the next thing you know, 6 more people are asking for more of it. Right?
Yeah.
So just find that one that you can sign up for and do, and see where that leads you.
Great, and I thank you so much. That's all absolutely just outstanding points, all spot on. I would like to take a moment to talk about something that I don't think we talk about very often, but I'm hoping that it's emerging organically here. There is not really a distinction, the way I see it, from research and teaching when we're talking about being in the classroom and we're talking about mentorship. And this idea that you're going to pick a research track and not do any teaching is increasingly rare.
Yes.
And so even if all you see, the only thing you can see, you are tenure track or bust, and all you want is a research-focused career, you are still going to be interviewing at an institution where chances are the expectations are going to be that you teach. And to not have some arrows in that quiver that can help you be successful is a big mistake, and I think it is a misstep. And we are not training our graduate students to think about being well-rounded in this way. So I will share one anecdote with no names. I have advised a few students who went through the European system. So I was a member of their doctoral dissertation committees, but they received their degrees through the European system, where they have very little teaching opportunities, and it is a fast track on research for the most part. These students, both of them, found that when they tried to, well, they didn't try, they were successful, but when they entered the job market in the US and they managed, they were successful in getting on-campus interviews. The weak part of their interview process was that they had no teaching experience and they couldn't even talk about a teaching philosophy. They didn't have any of these lectures or any type of teaching in the community, for example. They didn't have any of that because it's not something that was really encouraged in their programs. So speed was a big one. Hyper focused research, almost to the point of being a technician, is what was in a lot of these fields is really what is emphasized. You take that out of that context, you try to move it into a US system of higher ed, large state institutions like the one where we sit now. That doesn't work well, and that will come out at some point in your interview. And so I want to make that point that we often separate them. And I think that it's a folly to do so, when we're setting you up, to be as successful as you can.
I think a lot of these, I think 80-20 is probably the number to put in your head. And at most, R1 schools that I've experienced in the country, everybody's got an 80-20 load. 80% research, 20% teaching and service, 80% teaching, 20% research service. And so no matter which way you do it, you're going to be in the classroom. It's just, that's how it goes around here. And I've experienced on tenure track committees, I know this is like the last question, but on tenure track committees that I've sat on, the teaching demonstration wouldn't get you a job if your research was weak, but it would keep you from getting a job if your research was strong, but your teaching was weak. And so they are looking for both. I'd say it's the which way are we routing, up or down, on a lot of those tenure track jobs, because the truth is you're gonna be in the classroom with students as part of your mission, especially early on. And, trying to balance that and value it, I think is probably something that anybody who's got the tenure track mind ought to consider, so that's a great point.
Well, even the tenure track, most would expect to have graduate students or even mentoring graduate students. As graduate students, you can appreciate somebody that's really good at teaching and mentoring, right? So that might be you one day having your own graduate students. So, I'm familiar with advisors that were not that, and so they didn't do very well in the mentoring and the teaching part. And it's very frustrating even as a graduate student, right? So that teaching doesn't go away, right? It's important.
Yes.
I've heard a lot of advisor nightmare
Yes,
stories, so it still
yes.
matters.
It matters. It
Yeah.
matters so much, and it matters at every career stage, and we can all learn more. And so, yeah, more to come next year as we're rolling out our mentorship mosaic with mentoring mentors. Mentors need mentoring. We'll leave it there. Also, it's we can learn how to be better mentees as well.
Yeah.
So it's coming. Stay tuned for more graduate college programming. But to piggyback off of that, because I think that Dr. Johnson just said something really important about the actual kind of nuts and bolts of that process. So I want to pull a little strand in there. What should candidates consider when they're selecting a topic, particularly for a teaching demonstration or a chalk talk or any type of seminar demonstration? And what are some takeaways, some hot takes that you can share about what makes that good? Other than, several have been mentioned, but if you could pick, something that you remember as being particularly effective or memorable in that space, because even the very best educator has a bad day. They're nervous, they're in front of all of these people, so maybe you're not gonna, perhaps you do stumble, but so how should they go about picking a topic? And what should they be thinking about as a kind of a big takeaway for something to make it really strong?
I think when we've had candidates in, you should be asking questions. Who are the students that you're teaching? What is the knowledge that they have already? How can you build on that? If they say you can teach anything, dig a little deeper. What are the things that the students have learned? What is a concept that you would hope that I could bring into your class based on my expertise? Ask, because oftentimes people will come in with this preconceived concept of what they want to teach, and it doesn't have anything to do with our students. I mean, think about the demographic of our students here. We want to understand the population that we're teaching. We also want to really make a statement about that topic, right? Show that you understand that topic and then build on what's already been available or where they're moving in there. So asking questions always, don't be afraid to ask. I think that search committees want to know that you're invested in the process and that you're not just taking a teaching demonstration that you did for another institution 2 months ago. That doesn't sit well. That's kind of like, are you taking this seriously? So asking questions around what is the topic that would be best for the students.
Yeah. I have a quick question about that. Is your advice that we contact them like before the visit and ask all these questions?
Yes, because I know for us in the College of Education, we provide you with a topic. It's very general usually. And those that teach, especially because we've hired, a ton of faculty and residents in the College of Ed, when you come to teach that demonstration, I say you're going to teach literacy for a diverse population. That's huge. What does that mean to you? Am I teaching a class full of 25 undergraduates that are teaching a literacy instruction 1, or I'm teaching a graduate course that talks about diverse young adult literature? There's a big difference. So again, kind of just asking those questions. Yeah, reaching out to the search committee saying, I really appreciate you giving me the topic. Can I understand a little bit more about the students I'm teaching, and asking a few more questions. I don't think there's a search committee ever that would say, no, I don't want to tell you that. That's not the role of a search committee. So digging a little deeper.
Yeah, I asked a bunch of questions before I did my interviews, like what format,
Right.
what's the room gonna be like,
Right.
what kind of, technology do I have access to or not to, like, it's gonna be there, is it open to the public, is it, so there's all those questions too, but then if you don't have a specific topic, you should have done your research a little bit on their curriculum.
Yeah.
To see where, if you were to give this kind of mock class, does it fit with that kind of, curriculum with the typical classes that the department offers? And then I put just as much work as in designing my PowerPoints, if you're gonna use PowerPoints, as you do actually laying out your whole lesson, right? So making sure they're not too wordy, maybe like, how you would be in a class. Hopefully it's right to the point. And I tried to, some of my strategies include, like, if I was a student sitting in this classroom, what am I hoping they're gonna walk away? How would they have taken notes? What would become a test question later? Like, do I emphasize very specific concepts and then reiterate it? I'm not just giving them a lecture on a topic, I'm trying to actually teach them something very important. So that should be clear. Like, by the end of this lecture, you should know these 3 things.
Yeah.
And then come back to it. Did you know these 3 things? So you think through every step of the process. Yeah.
That's really cool. The idea of doing research on what you're gonna talk about based on something they're gonna be interested in, right? Job interviews is just a sales pitch, right? The product you're selling is yourself. And the customer are the people on the other side of the interview process, right? And so understanding what the customer is actually looking for is very wise. In the STEM fields, the committees that I've either been on or interviewed for, it's been very much give us a sample lecture from the middle of the class. It's kind of the prompt. So kind of what I would like to drive home is that teaching is the intersection of a lot of things, but I think 2 of them that are really important in an interview are the way that your expertise and empathy intersect. Expertise in you need to talk about something that you're comfortable with and that you're excited to present on. You're arguing for your life, right? You're in front of a committee saying, I've worked for the last decades to get to this point so that you would say yes and I can have my job, right? This is where this leads. So there's a lot of pressure on you. So pick a topic that you're not going to get flustered because it confuses you, right? But on the empathy side of it, choose a topic that you struggled with but don't anymore, that you can remember what it was like not to know that thing, right? Because if you can do a teaching talk that demonstrates your ability to create an aha moment, here's a topic that's really weird, right? Here's why I struggled with it even a little bit, and here's what I figured out, and maybe this helps, right? When you start thinking through it in that way, you become the guide instead of the sage, right? And this opportunity to demonstrate what it's like to take students from a place of having not seen this thing that you're now an expert in and move them to the other side of that experience.
I want to just touch on that, what you just said too, is that sometimes in a job talk, you want to throw out all these names and all these scholars that have taught this particular structure, and you want to spew bits of knowledge that maybe you've had throughout the whole process, and that becomes an imposter almost. So when you say, like, have an aha moment, make sure in that moment that you really understand the concept that you're teaching, and that you're not trying to necessarily teach something new per se, but something that you know well. I think is really important about what you said.
What I hear you saying is it's important to talk about something that you're expert in, but not necessarily try to impress them by explaining the most difficult concept in that course.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Because you're not trying to impress them with your knowledge, you're trying to impress them with your ability to explain it.
Yeah, exactly.
Make it accessible to someone else.
Exactly.
That's really cool.
So one of the ultimate failures, I had to do this over the phone with one liberal arts college, and I couldn't see them.
Oh no.
Yeah, so it was on like a conference call, and in my mind, I can almost picture them sitting around this big conference table, each taking a turn, like throwing questions at me, and I couldn't see their faces. And so I was so flustered and so stressed, because how awful to not like have no idea to like read their, you know, impression of you. And so that was probably the worst interview I've ever done, is to try to do that kind of a job interview over the phone. Not even Zoom like this where I could see you, but it was over the phone.
That's hard. I have thoughts on that process, but.
There are, but it is a reality. I know there's the what goes wrong is farther down the camp. But like, this is a thing, okay? I interviewed at 24 schools during my postdoc to try and get a job as a professor, and all but 2 of them were completely remote interviews. And this is way before pandemic.
Yeah, this was
We don't have budget to fly,
That's right.
and it's thousands of dollars. And we're gonna say no to all but one, what a waste, right? And so my teaching demonstrations were, and all the rest of the interview process too, were almost all remote, virtual. And so having comfort with the tech and being able to laugh when it doesn't work instead of that derailing you, and having an alternative, right? So like, I call it a chalk talk because my discipline still very much uses written notes as we go. And when I was a student, I used to get really angry at the faculty that had PowerPoint, by the way, because they could print and click through equations faster than I could write them down. And I was like, what am I supposed to do with this? Do I write down what you did without writing down what you did? I don't even know how to take notes yet.
That's why you share it before.
Yeah, well, they would. That's like.
That's why I say, it's still whiteboards are
Right, and
used
so-
regularly.
But
at least
I used to get really frustrated teaching in front of a classroom that the second I wrote something down, it was gone. And so I used an iPad with digital ink that could be PDF and give to students. And so I was already kind of comfy teaching that way, and that's what I do when I'm in front of a classroom or if I'm remote. So if you can find a way to almost use the same presentation style regardless of the context, and then just make the micro adaptations, adaptations that are needed, it's one more thing to not be uncomfortable about in an already uncomfortable situation. And the last thing on that topic wise, I always thought it was really helpful to start in the middle. And so I wouldn't, if you're asked to literally like simulate a lecture from a course you're teaching, don't do the first or the last day of the semester. Do something in the middle and literally just act like a minute like this isn't the first time you're talking to these folks. Okay, so last class, here's what we were about. Let me remind you real quick about how that carries over and what I'm going to tell you today builds on it. Because there's this really weird thing about doing these teaching demonstrations, which is it's the one time you're going to be teaching to a room full of people that you're sure know more about your topic than you do. I'm in front of my students and they have no idea, right? And so I'm taking them from a place of having never seen this to a place of understanding. Meanwhile, what they're watching for on your search committee are, they know what you're talking about, and they know where you're headed before you get there. How are you going to get there? That they're looking for that meta. And so that for me was very intimidating as well, which is another reason that I really like to drive home. Choose a topic you're comfy with, right? Because it's just one aspect of the talk that doesn't need to be a stressor for you, right? There's plenty of other parts of it.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna agree with that picking up in the middle, because it also shows that you teach with intention, that all of your classes there should be a stream there that you're building throughout the semester. It's not just a random lecture every time you come in. So there's a reason why. And so I always try my best to explain to my students why I'm teaching this way or why we're talking about this. They shouldn't have to guess. Why did I have to sit through this entire lecture? I'm trying to explain to them. I'm going to give you this case study, but remember at the end of the day, this was the concept, you know? So kind of pulling back the curtain to show them your logic. I don't know about you, but as a student, I always appreciate when you explain to me, why are we doing this? You know, I want to know, why are we doing this? Why are you taking my time? And what should I really be focusing on? It shouldn't be a mystery, you know? So, yeah.
Okay,
Chat thread.
yeah, we have a few questions here. I think I'll pull one that kind of applies more broadly. So in your experiences, how long do the demos usually last for? And second part of the question, having been on the other end, watching potential candidates, What are qualities you look for to give them a recommendation to the hiring committee?
Sort of like what makes a strong talk?
Like what makes them stand out, that would be the one you would recommend.
I wanna go back to what you said with the empathy and
Yeah.
anybody can teach a topic, maybe. Not anybody, but you can teach a topic. You can teach a topic. But are you engaged with us as a group? Are you engaged in the room, right? Because we've all mentioned it. One of the choices we made in becoming educators at the university level was the opportunity to engage with our students, right? And so that engagement, even though it feels weird with the faculty that are, if you're not teaching in a classroom and you have to teach faculty and not students, how do you engage? How do you ask names when you ask a question? Do you look at the audience? Do you participate in a way that makes people in the room feel seen or heard, right? For me, I'm always looking for that connection. And I also really appreciate when people say, I'm nervous, like saying it out loud. And that seems so silly, but in that room, it's okay to be nervous and say like, I'm just really looking forward to this opportunity and I'm a little bit nervous. Just that human aspect separates you from others, especially in the College of Education. I'll say we have selected candidates that might be more green per se, based on their ability to connect with us, connect with the group in the room, because that is an impossible thing to teach. We can teach you the content all day long and we can help you through that process, but we can't necessarily show you how to be empathetic, like you said, space.
In terms of the time though, that's where you contact them, like you ask these questions first. They're gonna tell you, we want you to do about a 45-minute or a half an hour long lecture and then leave the rest for us to ask you a bunch of questions. So that could vary. So those would be the questions you'd ask as you're preparing before you go to the university, go to the site. But the things that stood out for me and the things that I tried to do versus ones that maybe I didn't see as successful, where when you're clearly watching a research talk because they just lectured at you. And they just share their entire dissertation with you, basically.
Yes.
Versus a teaching talk that integrated multiple little activities, or like you will give a little lesson and then you break and say, okay, at this point, we're gonna do a little discussion, or at this point, we're gonna do work on the board together. Like you're showing the faculty some typical little things you might do in the classroom to foster that kind of engagement. It feels odd, because they're faculty, but you're showing them what you would typically do. So they get a sense for how you teach, rather than don't just give them your research, because they don't want to read your dissertation or listen to your dissertation. So there is a difference there. Yeah, that I think stands out.
Just piggybacking on all of that, I like what you said about admitting that you're nervous. I have a little bit different version of that, which is I tell my students every class, I'm gonna lie to you today. See if you can catch it. And what I'm actually doing is diffusing the fact that I'm about to do a bunch of complicated math and odds are I'm gonna mess up. Right? And so I say that to my students every class, and I said it at every job interview.
Did you really?
So that if I make an error and someone catches it, I can say, that's really neat. How did we catch that error? Why did I make this error? And what can we do?
Good job,
We're stuck on our homework, right? Because we're stuck on our homework. You're gonna make this error, right? You didn't distribute your minus sign across 17 stacked parentheses or whatever the thing, right? That happens.
It's that human aspect.
And so just calling it out ahead of time was something that was really important to me. As is kind of what y'all have been saying, this idea of like directly addressing metacognition. A great lecture isn't one that just shows up and presents the information clearly, right? It's when you take a break in the middle and you say, hey, when you're working on your homework sometimes, you get stuck and you feel angsty. And in that moment, rather than continuing to try and write something on the page, you're checking notifications, you go doom scrolling on Instagram for a minute, you remember that you had a bill to pay or that the dishwasher needed empty. You know why that is? It's because your brain hates stress. And so it's trying to trick you into feeling productive doing something else. When you're feeling that angst, that's the moment when you know you're about to learn something important. that's what it feels like. Just like when you go work out at the gym, that last rep is the one that you're not sure if you can do it. I'm gonna get this, darn it, and it doesn't go anymore, right? That's when you know you're about to get stronger. The brain version of that is being frustrated and stuck with your homework. And when you drop little TED Talks in like that in the middle of the lecture, it again is that human aspect, but it also helps the students realize like it's really normal for you to be totally freaking lost on what I'm talking about right now. Now let's untangle that, right? And you know, remembering that it's not just you on a screen with the content that you already understand. You know, we're guiding people through that and helping them see that the struggle is natural and actually beneficial. There's another layer that you can put in there.
Oh, that's great.
You're the coolest.
Oh
Fun to watch you teach.
my God.
Wow, that was fantastic. Do we have other questions? I want to make sure that we get to those questions. I have two I'm in a bundle if we don't have one on there. So we're coming up against time.
We do, and this might be a quick one.
Okay.
So when applying for teaching jobs in higher education, is all teaching experience considered, such as substitute teaching, graduate teaching assistantships, or full-time K through 12 teaching experience?
Is that from that sounds like an education
background.
major.
Yeah.
For us,
That's what
yeah, that's definitely me. We actually, in our calls in the College of Education, require that you have classroom teaching experience in some capacity. It can be very loose at times, but like some classroom, like elementary or high school experience, and then absolutely we require them to have at least a couple of years of teaching, or at least like 1 or 2 classes. It doesn't matter if it's the same classes at the graduate level, but we definitely look for that in ours. Does that answer that question?
Okay, so we don't have that much time, so I'm gonna ask a final question, which is sort of bundling two of these together and sort of getting back to, I think, a loose interpretation of one of the questions that was posed. But it would be, how are teaching demonstrations weighted? So in the overall process of a multi-day interview, that teaching demonstration, how much weight does it hold in terms of that overall process?
For us, it's huge if you're applying for an in-residence or clinical position. It actually outweighs any other portion of the process in many ways. We are really looking for someone that can come in.
No pressure.
I know, I know, no pressure.
That's why we're here.
But
That's why
I mean,
we're here.
I'm just giving an honest interpretation
thank you.
because you can talk to your colleagues, you can talk about your research, your vita can speak for yourself, but how you engage in your actual instruction rises to the top when we're looking for an in-residence. It goes back to what I said earlier. We've chosen candidates that don't have as much experience. They only have taught 1 or 2 classes, but they clearly demonstrate in their teaching talk and the way they interact that they are able to facilitate that. And I know that's from the College of Education perspective, and that's I've served on 5 in-residence searches, and that has just risen to the forefront. And when we think about that too, it's really, is your demonstration, and you talked about it a lot, it's Dr. Johnson, right? You talked about it a lot, that ability to just go from, this is what I want you to learn and I'm hoping you learn from today, to wrapping it up at the end to, this is where I hope I took you, right? That you can make sure that you have demonstrated that ability to go through the process of an engaged lesson. So it's pretty high for us in the College of Ed. But I think you would expect that if you're teaching teachers,
Right.
Pre-service educators and in-service educators.
First off, I love that. And you reminded me of the outline that my advisor gave me for every talk and lecture ever. He said, here's how it goes. Tell us what you're going to tell us.
Yeah.
Tell us what you told us.
Yeah.
Right.
Agreed.
Kind of like write a paper, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
And in the STEM field, it varies a bit more because you've got committees that are looking for teaching track folks like myself.
Yeah.
And of course, that's going to be the make or break most important part.
Yeah.
But on a research like tenure lines where they're going to be doing a more blended thing, they're looking for the whole picture, but it's still an aspect that can be a deciding factor, but it's not the most important thing. One of the things that's strange about it though is that most of these committees are filled with senior colleagues and have been around the department for a while and have kind of earned some respect in the college. But frequently what that also means is that they're a little less abreast of the current trends in education. And so like, I actually had a couple of talks that went really poorly, even though I did an awesome job teaching, I would say, right? Because they saw it as threatening that I was doing so much active learning. And that's that touchy-feely stuff for those non-STEM people. And so knowing some of the norms, this is gonna sound silly, but I started, I had this benefit of being early enough in my career, I can start looking up my committee on Rate My Prof.
Right.
And if everybody on there has a 2, I'm gonna give a very different guest lecture than I am if everybody else has a 5.
That's
Right?
awesome.
If the students are like, this person is amazing, then you gotta live up to their style. But if they're gonna walk in, turn their back to the class and start scrolling on a board and then walk out, you don't wanna go too far with the flashy stuff because they'll essentially see that as a threat, right? I do, however, think it's really important to embed your philosophy. And I know we didn't quite get to that, but I just wanted to say, like, in STEM, we don't necessarily ask you, tell us a little bit about your teaching philosophy as part of that experience. And so there are ways you can sneak it in. And this is becoming really important because there's a lot of state legislatures now that are crushing diversity statements and not even allowing them in job applications anymore. It's so screwed up. But you can still embed your beliefs. And so I do this in really small ways because I'm in STEM, so I'm not going to sit around lecturing on why we need to include more diverse folk in the middle of my thermodynamics class, right? But what I will say is something like, hey, this thing is commonly called Newton's second law, but what it actually is the conservation of momentum. And I like to refer to it as the conservation of momentum because that tells you what it's useful for instead of just reminding us about the old crusty white guy that came up with it 100 years ago. And all of a sudden, right? Or there are 3 coordinate systems in math. There's the Cartesian system, the polar system, and the cylindrical system. Polar and cylindrical are named for what they're useful for. Cartesian is short for Descartes. It's the rectangular system in this class, right? And when you say that, you communicate to your students that they matter and that you see them and that you are working on them. These types of things as well. And it's just these little subtleties that you can trickle in that hint at what really drives you, even though you're talking about some weird math concept or whatever related to your discipline.
It's really helpful, thank you. So I know we're about at the top of the hour, but one of the things that has been emerging out of today's panel is to also do your homework, to do your work, know who you're going to be teaching in front of, know what they're expecting, figure out the room you're in, ask about what concepts they might be looking for. And if you are applying to a teaching intensive position, you are going to be expected to teach multiple courses, probably many large courses, every term, every quarter, every semester. And so it also would be useful to know what they are expecting you to teach. What will this position be teaching? So the courses, the content, the space, the people, all of that is doing your work. So preparing and taking it very, very seriously and really being mindful about that preparation is something I've taken away from today. That just to be really thinking very thoughtfully about how you are preparing this for your audience, I think is also a really, really helpful piece of advice. We are at the hour, so Alyssa, if there are additional questions in the chat thread, they can forward them to the Grad Academy email and we can get those questions answered. Do we have any final questions in the room before we wrap up?
So as a part of the interview process, so there is a separate section called interaction with the students, like apart from the desk lecture. So are there any tips to excel in that? I mean, what students mostly expect from?
I think this is, you're suggesting like when you are at a university, you spend maybe all day there, right? So you might get to talk and then you spend time with students and then you spend time with faculty. So you're asking about that time with the students?
Yes.
I think it's important, at least it was for me, that unstructured time with graduate students. Sometimes graduate students even have a representative on the search committee, or even if they're not on the search committee, you're asked for the graduate student recommendation for that position. So I think that that is important. I mostly have spent my time listening. When I have been on the job market, I listen to what the students, well, I took my job for a reason. So I very much care what students have to say. I think probably all of us were drawn to what we are doing because we care very much about centering students and their experiences. So you might get a different answer elsewhere, but that's is listen to the students. They will be telling you.
The first thing that jumped into my mind when she asked that question. 2 ears, one mouth, what I hear you saying is, right? Spend as much time letting the students gush as possible and repeat back what you hear them saying in your own words, and they will walk out of that room saying, oh my gosh, this is the best teacher I've ever met, and you haven't even done anything.
You've just given
They
them
just want to be
space.
heard.
Ask them questions about their experience in the department, things that they, things they want to see in the department. Are there classes that you're interested in that you don't think you have yet? Or like, that's the listening part, you're asking all these questions. And then part of it is also reminding them that you remember what it was like to be a grad student, right? So you get, it's also just hanging out, being casual, like, can they approach you? Are you approachable? But I spent most of the time just kind of asking questions and letting them talk.
I've been in a couple of those.
Yeah.
I was a student talking to the hires. And I think I was in there with a couple of students, and one thing that was really important for us was trying to gauge if they're open to mentoring students in like an active way. Yeah.
It's important.
Yeah, I was just gonna say listening as well, just really listening and saying, like if Adjoa said to me, are you interested in this type of work? Think about before you respond. Don't say no if you're not sure about it, but think about like, I don't know much about that, but how can we work together to solve that? Or is there an avenue that you are interested in that I can really help you with that, things like that? Because we have an instant reaction to say, well, that's not my field. Well, it should be your field if they're asking. You don't have to be that flexible, but what can you learn from that student too? Because they are here to teach us as much as we are to teach them.
Yeah, and like Alyssa said, Dr. Friedman said, often they are prepared. They might have a spokesperson and they've already got questions for you. They're ready to present, Ash. You're interviewing all over again with these students. So, and they tend to be questions around what kind of classes do you teach? What opportunities do you have for research or for us to get engaged? How are you going to prepare me to be a professional? Like, because at the grad level, as you know, you're thinking, what are you going to do for me professionally or academically? It's not just about you having a cool class. What can you offer? And so they can have very, big questions that you've got to be ready to answer. That's a good question.
The one.
And also, don't forget, you're interacting with the faculty for 2 days too, so do your research on them. Have something to say to them about their work or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. So prepare. But one final thing I'll say is that oftentimes faculty are going to show up because this is their colleague, but students often in these settings are a self-selected group. They're choosing to do this work. They're choosing to spend their time that they could be engaged in other things to ask you questions. And so take that seriously because they are giving their time to this in a very different way than faculty are. So really center their voices in that space. All right, I think we are there. Please join me in thanking our panelists. This was wonderful. This was absolutely wonderful. I want to take a class from all three of you.
Well, I think that attending these kinds of things, I did the same thing as a grad student. If I ever saw a workshop, a certificate, take advantage of all these things that are available before you leave. You're just building all of this, so I think that's great that you have these workshops.
We're so glad you guys came.
Yeah,
Thank you.
And thank you to Alyssa Gardner and the TGA team. Thank you, Alyssa.
Many thank yous in the chat to you as well.
Oh, yeah, wonderful. All right, thanks everyone, and this will be posted for folks who.
And reach out to us.
Yeah.
I can't speak for my colleagues, but reach out to us.
Yeah,
We're
anytime.
happy to help.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone. Have a good rest of your day.